Welcome back, everyone. This week we're going to be reading three different works. A short story by Ursula Le Guin entitled The Ones Who Walked Away from Omelas, an essay by Ursula Le Guin about why she wrote that story, and then a short story by Herman Melville called Bartleby the Scrivener. So what I want to do in this video is give you some background information on Le Guin and Melville, and then also to provide you with some ways of thinking about these two stories. So let's start with Ursula Le Guin. Le Guin is a contemporary author. She was born in 1929, and she actually passed away earlier this year. She's a really flexible writer who is most famous for writing works of science fiction and fantasy, as well as children's stories. And her writing is really notable for a few characteristics. First, her work uses a lot of really realistic details in order to create these, absolutely imaginary worlds of within her fantasy and her science fiction. Her work also engages with really profound ethical considerations and conundrums. And her work oftentimes can resemble myths or even allegories, as you might notice when you're reading the short story she wrote for today. Now, one of the reasons why that's the case is that she draws on mythic archetypes. And an archetype is an idea, a pattern, a character, or a symbol within one story. And it's usually one that we see over and over again within cultures all over the world. And it typically symbolizes something that's sort of universal about the human condition. So, an example of an archetypal idea that you might see in a myth or a story is the battle between good and evil. An archetypal character might be that of, the brave hero. And a symbolic archetype within a story might be trees used to symbolize, nature. Now, an archetype is different than a literary convention, which we've talked about in weeks past. Literary conventions tend to be more rhetorical. So, for example, the words once upon a time is a literary convention that lets us know that we're in the realm of a fairy tale. But that's really a set of words. That's really a piece of artistry that the author is drawing upon. And literary conventions also tend to be very culturally specific. So, for example, when we hear the words once upon a time, we know that we're in the realm of a fairy tale. But fairy tales in other cultures don't necessarily use those words to tell us that we're in a fairy tale. That's why those words are ultimately conventions. They're not archetypes. So the archetype that Le Guin draws on the ones who walk away from Omelas is the figure of the scapegoat. You're probably already familiar with what a scapegoat is, but let's just shore up that definition. First of all, the term scapegoat has its origins in Leviticus. And within Leviticus, it has to refer to a goat that's released into the wild on the Day of Atonement. And that goat has the sins of the people sort of symbolically heaped upon it. So when it's let loose in the wild, there's a way in which it takes with it all those sins of the people associated with the goat. But the term has come to mean anyone who is blamed or punished for the transgression of others. And that's exactly the situation of the child in Ursula Le Guin's story. The happiness and prosperity of Omelas depends upon the misery and suffering of this one child. And as she points out in her essay, the existence of the child raises a difficult, if not impossible, moral question, which is it moral to allow one person to suffer in order to save the happiness of thousands? Or put another way, is it moral to save one person at the expense of thousands of other people? So, as you read the story, I want you to think about how she lays out this paradox. But I also want you to think about how the residents of Omelas use the child's own suffering as a justification for their scapegoating. All right, I'm going to end this video. The next video will deal with Herman Melville.